Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So in this video, we're going to be talking about my encounter with Anthon2010. Always very tricky opponent. Let's get to it. E4, G6, D4, and Bishop G7. So I'm playing the modern again, right? As you can tell, I'm repeating some openings. I'm getting not the center, but rather just a very small setup. So d6, knight c6, and now I play e5. And after d5, this is a mainline theory, knight d4. And now bishop takes d4 is just a little bit of a mistake, because after knight e2, c5, pawn takes c6, pawn takes, and the move queen to a5. Because after queen d2, queen takes, king takes, and bishop takes knight. So then king e2 happens. And here I immediately played bishop to a6. But there are definitely other moves, right? For example, I could play queen to e5, threatening both the knight and this pawn on e4. I could play the move queen to c5, threatening the pawn on c4 and the knight on d4. I could play knight f6, right? And I could play queen to b4, threaten these two. So there are so many moves here. But I play bishop a6 because I want to get another piece out into the attack, and I also want to um, maybe prepare rook b8. I don't know. So bishop a6, b3, and now queen to h5. And you might be like, why'd you go queen check? Right? Well, I basically thought that after queen c5, I thought, knight g to f3 and knight f6. There wasn't much, right? I wasn't taking advantage of the king's position. So I said queen h5, and if you play knight to f3, I'm going to play c5. That's what I said in as what I thought, and try to go take the rook. But when I looked at it afterwards, I didn't like it, because giving up this bishop for this rook and thinking about it, well, this bishop is actually very much valuable, and I would argue that it's maybe even more valuable than that rook on a1. So this was poor judgment. So I would say, at this point, I probably don't need to be too rushed in terms of trying to get back this king. Maybe I can go queen b6 and d5 and continue this pressure here. I can play knight f6 and put this pressure on e4, but I was a bit too rushed in terms of putting pressure on that a1 rook. So queen h5, f3, and now I said queen to c5. So I think f3 was not so great. Knight f3 had to be played because, although f3 might look okay, right? It's supporting the e4 pawn. It's letting the king go to f2. Development is key in this position. So f3, and now queen to c5. So now I've officially tied down the knight. So after king d3, I played d5. And my goal was to bring the rook out and try to put more pressure on this d4 knight. But I also wanted to open the position, right? When you are in a attacking position, you want it to be open so you have your line of sight to the king. Rook c1, I take knight to e2, okay. I'll just bring my rook out. Pawn takes e4, and now queen to g5. Just saying, I need to get you out of there. King to f2, and what I should have done here is to move knight to f6 and go for that pawn on e4. Right? I should have done that. But instead I was so fixated on this pin that I played c5. And this move, well, it makes things complicated for me. knight to f3. And you might be like, what's so complicated? And the answer is, well, if I take on d1, knight takes g5, rook takes, there's knight takes c1, right? And so I don't gain any material from that. I'm just still down a pawn, right? So what do, right? Do I move my queen back to e7? Do I move my queen to h6? So what do? So instead, remember, I should have done knight f6 here. That is a reminder for myself, in case if I play knight g4, if I play queen to e3. So I have possibilities here. So king f2, c5. Now knight f3 strikes, and I'm like, okay, do I have a way out of this? And I think I do. Take, take. Now, the move that I thought saved me, well, it was one move later, but bam. So another interesting move is bishop d4. And if knight takes d4, rook takes rook. And if king f3, what is the move? Rook d3. And if king g4, well, knight f6, h5. There are so many ways to approach this. Even bishop c8 is a way to approach this. So there's many ways to think about it. So I could have done this, but I didn't spot it. So I said take, take, and now bishop h6. This long diagonal with the two knights on it. One knight is going to fall. h4, f6, knight e6. And this is a complicated, but I only have one move in the position that holds my advantage. And that is the move bishop to c8, saying, I'm threatening your knight, so you have to move your knight. So then I'll take your knight. But if I took right away, there's knight c7 check, and this bishop is going to be gone. So it's important to get that tempo on the knight. Take, king to f7. Now I could have also brought my bishop back to c8, but I decided, chess players yawn sometimes, so that's okay. King to f7, and I sort of decided that I didn't need to back my bishop up to c8. I basically said, if you take, I'll take. I'll be okay with that. So bishop e2, knight e7, rook d1, rook c8. You take, I'll take. I'll play f5. So at this moment, I was unsure of whether I was better, whether I was just slightly better, or whether I was winning. I don't know. So I played rook c5, and I sort of had this mentality that, whatever what happens, I'll be okay. So bishop g7, pawn takes. Okay, I'll take with the rook. There's no bishop g4 because there's a pin. King g2, rook f4. So now I'm finally putting pressure to get these pawns, right? King g3, bishop to e5. So I'm starting to mobilize the troops in the right place. Bishop to d5, knight takes. I'm very happy to trade because I think this is winning. And as long as I go take those pawns, right, I'll be winning. And then here I sneak in the move h6 because I get to protect that pawn, I get to promote, and I get to go for things, and eventually I checkmated our friend Anthon2010. So what was the big mistake here? Well, the big mistake was the trouble all started from the move bishop takes d4. The bishop was a good piece, right? And the knight, well, if knight g2 happens, I think c5 is a move. But, I mean, it's mixed. Some people like it because there's en passant and there's knight b5. So, I don't know if I can do that. So in this case, knight g2 had to be the way. And, things worked out in my favor more than they did in Anthon 2010's favor. So bishop takes d4, I was able to play c5, and this queen a5 move was extremely important to my strategy. Bringing the king out, queen h5 is horrible. What I should have done is queen to c5, and if knight f3, just bring the knight out with f6. I was not very patient in this game, right? As you can tell, I was constantly searching for the blowout move, but there was no blowout move. So, queen to c5, and notice, instead of f3, knight to f3, because development is key. So here, you don't want to bring the king out so wide in the open. And I made a mistake of playing c5, allowing the move knight to f3. So what I should have done instead is I should have played knight to f6. I should have recognized that this knight is dead, and I need to look for other targets, right? So after c5, knight f3, I made the game more complicated for myself, and surely I was able to convert, right? I was able to bring my pieces around to the right places. But it was with the help of Anthon2010 that I was able to do this, right? Because I could have had a harder time doing this, but luckily I didn't. So in the next game that I played against Anthon2010, it was a Tarrasch defense. This is knight c3, c5. So in this position, there are many ways to continue. There is take, knight f3. There is take, d4, knight e4, and this move bishop takes c5, right? And the move queen a5, getting back the lost bishop. There's so many ways to do it. But here our friend played f5. And I didn't think this was a move, so I played knight d6 right away. And I brought my knight out, went for a pawn break, and after e5 I took. And here I remember thinking, what happens if white plays, or black plays e4, right? What do I do? How do I make this situation decent for me? So I first look at the move d5. Is this okay for me? Well, after pawn takes, and queen to e7, I have to move my king to d2, because if I move my bishop to e3, there's f4, and that's not good. So instead, I cannot play d5, so I have to play something like knight to e5. I have to give it up and try to do something else, right? So I could play, queen to c2, I could play bishop to e2, but it's clear that playing e4 is what I would consider a more complicated way of dealing with things rather than the simplifying way of taking on d4. So after bishop d3, I castled. I played a3 because I wanted to prevent knight b4 from happening. And after bishop e6, I said, let's go for it. Rook e1 and b4. Now knight g5, and I'm starting to slowly transition my pieces from just developing, right, to becoming an active role player. So I play knight g5, just simply saying, I'm going to double attack you on two fronts. You back up, and I'll play queen to b3, just looking towards that place again. Rook e8, and now bishop d2. Queen to f8, I play check, I check, I check, and I take the rook. So now I'm at material, right? I have to convert this, and this is complicated because it's not immediately clear how I should clear it right away, but I was thinking I have to do some dominance with my bishops, right? So bishop d7, I was like, okay, perfect. Our friend Anthon2010 is not doing much, so I will move the bishop, right? Move the pawn to prevent knight to e4 from happening. Bishop e6, I want to trade pieces. I want to get the tension off of me, right? Rook e7 now. And I'm starting to create some pressure. And this is where I will leave off in our next video. So I'll see you then.